There are many forms of atheism. Atheism comes in many disguises. The first form I would like to discuss is I don't know if God exists. It's usually called agnosticism. Agnosticism asserts that we just don't know whether God does exist or not exist, and we have no way of ever knowing one way or the other. So this is not really atheism in the strict sense, for it also says that we have no knowledge that God does not exist. It just keeps us in limbo. I agree, logic is not the best tool to prove that God does or does not exist. As Chesterton once said, atheism is the most daring of all dogmas, for it is the assertion of a universal negative. What does that mean? It's much easier to find out that there is a black swan somewhere than to prove that there isn't one at all. Perhaps we may come to the conclusion that God is unknown, which is agnosticism, but it's almost impossible logically to conclude that God is in fact not present, absent. In general, it's just impossible to close any search for God with the conclusion that there is no God. No searches ever conclusively reveal the absence of their object. Then we have a second form of atheism. It says, I know there is no God. So why could these people come up with it? They say, when I look through my telescope or through my microscope, I never discover God. No, of course not. How could science ever prove on its own that science is the only way of finding truth? No experiment could ever do that trick. There is so much in life that counts, but cannot be counted like we count in science and in normal life. And there is so much more in life than what meets the eye. God is the creator of what is seen and unseen. Many famous scientists have found him. Werner Heisenberg said the first drink from the cup of natural science makes someone atheistic, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. And Max Planck, the famous quantum physicist, says for the believer God is the beginning, but for the scientist he is the end of all reflections. Einstein used to say, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And Pope John Paul II said something similar. Science can purify religion. Religion can purify science from idolatry and false absolute. Then there is another form of atheism. I can't prove there is a God. I agree, there is no waterproof procedure to prove there is a God. God cannot be measured or quantified the way we measure everything else in life or specifically in science. God is the primary cause, so he could never be discovered among the secondary causes of the universe, for God is not one of those secondary causes that we search for in science. Any demand for scientific evidence through laboratory testing is in effect asking God to become our servant. As Peter Kreeft, Boston College professor of philosophy, says, the question of God is not about what is below us, but about what is above us. To put it differently, let us not forget that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence of God. Still, many people say if we can't prove there is a God, then God must be a delusion. We find it centuries ago, and not too long ago we found it already in Sigmund Freud's work. He sees religion as a childish delusion. So atheism apparently is a form of grown-up realism. Doesn't he look grown-up? I would say in response, Christianity is telling us that things are not the way we should wish them to be, we would wish them to be in our dreams. It's definitely not a childish delusion, a childish hope. And if Freud is right that our beliefs are the rationalization of our deepest wishes, doesn't that hold also for his own atheistic beliefs? And besides, I would say, even if it were wishful thinking, that does not prove that it is nothing more than wishful thinking. A fourth form of atheism: I don't need to believe in God, because I am fully self-sufficient. I can roll up that stone on my own, like Sisyphus. This form of atheism is sometimes nicely called humanism. We are the measure of all things, and we can solve all our problems with economic, technological, and social tools. We can do it on our own. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says humanism falsely considers man to be an end to himself and the sole maker of his own history. Man is the measure of all things and no longer God. So what we see in the right lower corner, that picture has changed dramatically in humanism. To put it differently, I am at the center of everything. The world revolves around me. Really? What does that lead to? I have only one answer. You will end up there. Here lies an atheist, all dressed up and no place to go. And then there is a form that says, I don't trust any belief in God. I don't trust. They are so sure that nothing is really sure. Their life is based on mistrust. If they ever pray, they would say, oh God, if there is a God, save my soul if I have one. It's called skepticism. It is a very restrained view on the world. Absolute skeptics cannot even know whether they have a mind to doubt with. What is the problem with skepticism? It turns things the wrong way. Our ultimate goal is not to avoid errors but to gain truth, but we do need to avoid errors sometimes and eliminate them in order to get to the truth. But that's only a means to gaining the truth. So if you are a skeptic like that, I think Anthony Hopkins put it well, you end up in a prison cell, a closed cell with no windows. And then there are atheists who say, I can't believe there is a just God. Sometimes we encounter in our life death, sickness, loss, and suffering. They strike us. And what do? They either make us become bitter or better. They either help us to gain faith or to lose faith. It's up to us. C.S. Lewis used to be an atheist, for he found that the universe was so cruel and unjust, until he discovered that if the whole universe has no meaning, we should have never found out that it has no meaning. If there were no light in the universe and no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. Dark would be without meaning. And then there is an atheism that says, I just never think of God. It sounds very harmless, but it can be detrimental. They never give God or religion a thought. They have forgotten that our culture is steeped in Christianity, but it has become highly secular in habits and practices. It's called secularism. So the old picture of God's hands breathing life into us has become obsolete. I think Alexander Solzhenitsyn put it very well. He said, what is the root of all the evils of the 20th century? He found one profound truth: men have forgotten God. They just never think of God. Benedict XVI said something similar. The air we breathe in our societies nowadays is polluted often by a non-Christian, non-human mentality. I would say because God is omnipresent, God seems to be nowhere. But that is only seemingly so. God is all over the world. Fish, last thing they would discover is water. Well, atheists are in a similar predicament. The last thing they could ever discover is God because they are surrounded by it. Most of them don't even reach that point. And then there is one more form of atheism that I need to discuss. I hate any belief in God. These are the militant atheists, like there are militant Christians, militant Muslims, and militant agnostics. There are militant atheists. They work at their computers, they write books, they send messages through the internet. It's a cult of people who want to refuse to believe in God. They think it's evil, so it needs to be attacked or even eradicated. They consider spreading their message of God hatred like a holy war, a sacred mission. It's the militant form of atheism. Here is one of them, the one of the God delusion. But I wonder, there is something very peculiar about this form. If you constantly remind people of God while you are maintaining that he does not exist, how could that be? How could you hate something that is not there, you think? Why would you do this? That's my question to these atheists. Probably because they say, God, I hate you. I know you exist, but I hate you. Cardinal Wyszynski was oppressed by communism all his life, and he discovered in the propaganda of communism that in order to hate God you must first have faith that there is a God. For only when you firmly believe in God will you be able to hate him. That's what communism did, and that is what a modern form of atheism does. What is behind this deep-seated hatred? I have only one answer. There is only one force that hates God more than anything else, and that is Satan, the personification of evil. Destructive, militant atheism is part of a much larger picture, a cosmic warfare between God and Satan. God's aim is for us to attain heaven. Satan's aim is to make that impossible for as many people as possible. Let's look at these infamous atheists. One killed more than 62 million people. Stalin. Mao killed more than 35 million. And Hitler killed more than 21 million people. How could they do that on their own? What gives them so much power? I have only one answer. That power comes from another source. A satanic fight against God and his creation. These people sold their souls by following orders that stem from sources far beyond their own resources. They could do much more than they could have done on their own. Thanks to a power behind them, the power of Satan enabled these people to spellbind and enslave the minds and spirits of millions, creating hell ahead of time right here on earth. These are just 8 forms of atheism. You will encounter them in your life. Some of them are probably in your own life. We all have a mixture sometimes of that. Sometimes we hate God. Sometimes we just don't think of him. Sometimes we think, how can there be a just God? Or we say, I can't prove it. I don't trust it. I don't need it. I hope I gave you some reasons to reconsider some of these options, or actually all of them. If you want to know more about it, I recommend my book, Of All That Is, Seen and Unseen, published by queenship.org. You can also find them on wheredowecomefrom.com with slashes in between. It's a question and answer book. It poses a question and it's answered. And the first chapter is on atheism, but there is much more in this book that somehow has something to do with the roots of atheism.